Happy New Year and welcome back to Prices at the Pumps, our weekly look at all things energy related. Scott Squires, pleased as always to be joined by the energy expert Dan McTeague. Dan, welcome back. Happy New Year. Happy New Year, our first Prices at the Pumps for 2024. First of all, quickly, how was your holidays and New Year's?
It was great. Not very restful. A lot of work to do. Good to see so much family and good to see you back in the saddle again for 2024. Should be a roar, Scott.
Great to have you back. I'm sure 2024 will be just as adventurous as 2023, if not more. Okay. First time this year to talk about where the prices are headed, what adjustments are being made. Your best estimate, Newfoundland, Labrador, PEI, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, tomorrow and Friday. What are consumers going to see?
Well, it's a tale of two different predictions. The Thursday prediction tomorrow for Newfoundland won't be a pleasant one. They are going to be seeing the introduction of the delayed clean fuel standard, clean fuel regulation. It's better known as the second carbon tax of the Trudeau government. And that will at least mean an increase at the pumps of 4.6 cents a litre. That'll be the small 0.3 cent increase week over week in gasoline, plus about 4.3 cents for the first installment of this second carbon tax. So 4.6 cents a litre for gasoline going up. And of course, for diesel, more intense. We're looking at an increase there that will be in the order of about 7.5 cents a litre. So we're looking at a scenario now where prices, at least for diesel, will be now effectively above $2 a litre. Home heating oil will not see the similar increase since it's not applied. The work that we've done here at Canadians for Affordable Energy and the provincial premiers afterwards, with the work that we had pointed out that it was extraordinarily difficult for Atlantic Canadians to make ends meet. The federal government took heating oil off as far as the second carbon tax, and of course has done it very recently with the first carbon tax.
What about Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island on Friday? Looks like Newfoundland's going to take a hit tomorrow. What about the rest of the Atlantic region?
Not much in the way of any major increases. Perhaps 0.4, 0.5, half a penny increase for gasoline, depending, of course, on racks for PEI. So Nova Scotia, PEI, and New Brunswick won't see a whole lot of worry at the pumps, less than a penny either way. But for diesel, unfortunately, diesel prices will be going up about 2.7, 2.8 cents a litre for the three remaining Atlantic provinces, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and PEI.
Dan, you just referenced the carbon tax that's going to be heaped on Newfoundland and Labrador consumers tomorrow. And that brings me to the thought of April 1st, 2024, usually known as April Fool's Day. Perhaps there's some hidden meaning there with another carbon tax increase coming April 1st. I know we just started the new year. It's early January, but as we learned, Dan, when we do this show, the weeks just fly by. What do consumers need to know about what's coming April 1st?
So on April 1st, wholesale gas prices will also be, witness a significant increase in the carbon tax. We'll be going from $65 a ton to $80 a ton, which that really means is a net increase of about 3.3 cents a litre plus 15% HST. So about 4 cents a litre, 3.9, 4 cents a litre come April Fool's Day. The government, of course, whatever bureaucrat came up with the idea that would be the great day to do it, allows folks like me to come out and point out and say that the joke is really on Canadians. And as we know from the parliamentary budget officer, so not conservatives, not liberals, not partisan types, but from the actual, if you will, referee who has looked at these things, the first carbon tax will rebate you less than what you ultimately pay, not just in energy, but as we know, it cascades through other areas of the economy, the cost of pretty much everything, notably food. So yes, that will be an increase of about 4 cents a litre for gasoline. If I'm looking at diesel, currently at about 17.38 cents a litre, that'll go up to 21.39. So about a 4.5 cent a litre increase for diesel. And of course, you will have an exemption for a while on home heating oil, but propane and natural gas in provinces that use that will also see an equivalent increase. So propane will go from 10.06 cents a liter plus HST up to 12.38 cents a liter. I had to look back to see where we are in natural gas because it's done by cubic meter. I'm looking at that right now. The number there is a little different. It has us going up from about from 12.39 cents per cubic meter to 15.25 cents a cubic meter. So any way you slice it, April 1st is going to be expensive. And this, as we know, these increases will be annually, each and every year, right until 2030. And that's only the first carbon tax, Scott. The second carbon tax, which Newfoundland is going to experience tomorrow, which the other three Atlantic provinces have already currently begun paying, which British Columbia has been paying for several years. It's one of the reasons you pay for $1.60, $1.70 for a liter of gasoline there. The other provinces, Quebec, Ontario, and the prairies will soon have to pay the second carbon tax. And I hate to depress or put too fine a point on it, with our environment minister, Stephen Guilbeault, who I think more of as Hans Gruber from the very recently watched by many people, Die Hard, has decided that a cap on only oil and gas emissions will likely lead to another 20 cents. What are we talking about? Between the 1, 2, and 3 carbon taxes by 2030, the Trudeau government, along with its support from the NDP and the Greens and the Bloc, will in fact increase all of those carbon taxes and all of the cost of living, pushing diesel to about $1.20 a liter higher. That's even without the market, without the other taxes, and gasoline probably about $90 to $1 a liter. So good luck keeping your internal combustion engine. Better get those scooters ready. You're going to need them in the dead of winter.
Dan, I'm going to ask you to put your MP, your Member of Parliament hat back on for a moment. And I say that because, we've referenced it before. For 18 years, you were a Member of Parliament. And for many years before that, you did a lot of work on behalf of the Liberal Party. So you're my MP. I'm going to come to you and I'm going to say, Dan, I consider myself a good steward of the environment. I do all I can to reduce, reuse, recycle. I don't drive my car any more than I have to. And I really try to do the best that I can within myself to be a good steward of the environment. And I realize that we want to have a better tomorrow for our next generations. But then I want to ask you, Dan, as my MP, why am I and other Canadians being punished for driving a gas-powered vehicle or for heating my home with oil? And I say that because it's the consumers that all of this movement forward for net zero and for electric vehicle use and all of those things, it's being put on the shoulders of average Canadians. And Dan, as my MP, I just want to ask you, why am I being punished for driving a gas-powered car? And I do my best, but what's going on?
Well, there's a small, very determined group of people in this country who believe that gas prices and gas internal combustion engines are dirty, inefficient, don't do the work that alternatives can do. All of those, of course, are false, and especially when one considers that the alternatives aren't ready for prime time. In order to support civilization or standard of living, we've simply discounted the significant efficiencies and lessening of pollution that we see from these vehicles. I don't think consumers are taken into consideration here. This is all about a narrative. This is all about an ideology that says one molecule, one gas, CO2, is going to bring the world to its knees. I think real scientists know better, not those who are paid to find cute, trendy ways to distort data or not furnish data at all to support their claims. But you now have politicians who are activists, things like people like Stephen Guilbeault, who we referred to a little earlier, well-noted activists with a raft of interesting career in which he does not want people driving out of the 15-minute cities. He doesn't want people to drive, period. This is a fellow who is, an environmental climate purist and doesn't take into consideration the impact this has on people. So it isn't so much that they do want to punish you for doing the things you're doing, using natural gas, propane, and any other product, look around you, that is derived from fossil fuels. It is that they have an ideology that says, doesn't matter if we don't have a substitute available. We simply want to reduce your quality of life, your ability to make ends meet. And that has enormous consequences. But if people aren't cluing into that yet and continue to support these parties, I would say as a member of parliament, you're not going to object to what I'm doing, even though it's punishing and driving you into the ground with zero to show for it other than massive debts and your impoverishment. Well, that's on you. And I can tell you, the consumer has the ability to fight back here, but they've got to exercise it every few years when there is an election. By the polls, I saw some glimmer of hope that there could be some change in policies earlier this summer when those taxes were imposed right here in Atlantic Canada. We saw the numbers change. But slowly but surely, we see the same people who were upset at the beginning saying, yeah, well, we can probably be bribed for, I don't know, a Timmy's or a coupon or a rebate. I think people have to recognize that this is a war on humans and this is a war on our ability to make ends meet. And so to do that, I think voters, as much as consumers, need to act decisively and rid us of this coalition government that is imposing hardship, unnecessary and ridiculous hardship based on very, very suspicious science. And at the same time, recognize politicians will need to have perhaps a different approach to putting people first once and for all.
Well, Dan, it's certainly an interesting discussion, and thank you for humoring me through that role play of Dan the MP and Scott the constituent. We talked about Newfoundland earlier and what's going on there, with the carbon tax being applied this week. But a story caught my eye from SaltWire's Juanita Mercer over in Newfoundland and Labrador. She's a multimedia journalist with SaltWire. And the title of the story is Testing the Waters. Newfoundland and Labrador floats idea of selling offshore oil equity stakes. And I'll just read you a little bit of the first part of it, and then you can discuss. And again, I can remind folks that they can find this article online at saltwire.com from Juanita Mercer. But it says, if investors are looking to get into the offshore oil industry, the Newfoundland and Labrador government is floating the idea of presenting would-be buyers with a bundle deal on its equity stakes. And then there's a quote here. It says, we would love to bundle all these together, including the intellectual property within Oil and Gas Corporation of Newfoundland Labrador, just to see what interest is out there in the global marketplace for them. And that's a quote from Industry, Energy, and Technology Minister Andrew Parsons in Newfoundland and Labrador. And again, folks can go to saltwire.com and read that full article. But Dan, you and I have talked about the oil and gas industry in Canada and in particular Newfoundland and Labrador. What things does this article tell you about the state of oil and gas exploration and what the Newfoundland and Labrador government is doing here?
Well, I think it's a wise move by the government to look at its assets, assets which lie on the floor bed of the ocean, for which the world wants more of. I mean, look, Guyana being the best example in the Western Hemisphere, a country that, could very well be, the source of significant wealth simply because it's sold some of its properties to Exxon, who happen to find some of the most desirable oil plays in the world. Canada could do very much the same. We have to fund the provinces and the federal government. We need funds to maintain social programs. The only way you're going to do that in the real world of today is that the world will continue to need hydrocarbons for generations to come. So I think it's perhaps a move towards being realistic. The province has significant holdings, which the world will eventually want sooner or later. And a change in government federally will likely make things a little bit more enticing to investors who will say, we look at White Rose, we look at Ben Nevis, we look at, the oil fields off the coast. There is much promise, and you don't need a pipeline to get it to markets. They're right there. So this does create opportunities. It also helps fund other things. I mean, I know Newfoundland and the federal government has, certainly committed themselves to hydrogen using windmills, but apart from their unsightliness, and I won't get into, some of the concerns that people are raising about the improbability of those kind of infrastructure projects, we're talking tens of billions of dollars to put up 50, 60 fields like this in and around Newfoundland. If you're going to do that, you got to finance it some way. You can't continue, as the federal government is doing, borrowing money in order to achieve renewables, which have, pretty suspicious and not necessarily the kind of outcomes that we want. So better to invest or to provide an opportunity and as it were, test the waters, because I think the world does want more Canadian oil. It's really our political leaders who are saying, no, there is no business case, which the world finds rather ironic and rather silly. They'll get it from someone else if they don't get it from us.
And again, you can see that full article from Juanita Mercer at saltwire.com. Dan, at my own peril, I'm going to ask you to comment on a post that I put out on X a few days ago. And it was a reply to a post that I saw on X about, I'll just paraphrase it, but progressive policymakers' blind spot: increased numbers of EVs on roads will reduce road infrastructure lifespan and introduce risk of catastrophic failure for parking structures not designed for increased loads, say civil engineers. And then there's a link to a story. I know that you were tagged in that post, but I'll ask you to comment on my reply. And again, I believe in making things better and finding a way forward and leaving a better world for our next generations, than I have right now. But when I put this out, this is genuinely how I feel. And my post was, it seems like EVs, net zero, and electrification are like icebergs. We're allowed to see 10%, but there's 90% we're not shown. The devil is in the details. And I see so much about what all of these things will mean in terms of mining and copper and all these other things. But then again, at my own peril, what are your thoughts on my post?
Well, I think you're touching on what I think most really fear talking about. And we're not hearing it from mainstream media. We're not hearing it from people who, whose job it is to look at public policy, and certainly not from politicians whose interests, not just today, but those of the future, have to be considered. I think we all want to do better, but in order to get there, what is being proposed and what is being offered isn't better. It's a retrograde step backwards. If it takes 5 times the amount of mining, especially copper, to reach those goals on EVs, if we are prepared to put all our eggs in one electrification basket to satisfy someone's fantasies on net zero, whatever that should mean, because it's not a well-defined term, and that we're prepared to throw away the entire Canadian economy, our standard of living, to achieve those things, and pay billions of dollars to companies to build batteries that may be whose technology may be obviated in the next couple of years by better forms of energy and engine propulsion. I think we're making a terrible mistake, and we're doing that thing that we often find leaders don't do. They don't look before they leap. And what they're doing is they're committing generations to an uncertain future, and a future in which even those who would be supportive of these initiatives now find themselves unable to afford them and therefore will not sign on. It is self-defeating. And I think what you've raised in your post, based on the improbability and the shortcomings of renewables and other solutions to reducing and decarbonizing, if that's in fact a concern. I think what it does suggest is that, and we're starting to see this across Canada, people simply cannot sign on to something that they know means that at the end of all of this, they won't be able to manage to make ends meet. And the increasing numbers of Canadians who are in that position is frightening, and it's growing. And for that reason, I think those who are policymakers who have these ambitions in mind are going to have to recognize that they cannot proceed without getting the approval and getting people on board. It's one thing to scare people into believing the world is coming to an end. Like most people think that's a crock. But even for those who are at that point, if you can't put food on the table and you can't keep your house warm and you can't get to work, it seems that the plot is definitely lost. And I think they need to get back to the books, do their homework, and find a better way to achieve what they want to achieve. I think you get more people signing on, as opposed to what we're seeing today, a stampede of people walking away from this nonsense.
Dan, we're going to wrap up here shortly. But again, it's been a couple of weeks since we spoke. Dan, is there anything that you're seeing domestically, internationally, geopolitically, that's getting your spidey sense tingling?
Markets are discounting geopolitical tensions in a very significant, very serious way. And I think those markets are not being driven by fundamental supply and demand. If they were, I think energy prices would be a little higher than what we're paying today. I think discounting what is happening globally, the rearrangement of a new order in which countries like Russia, China, Iran, Venezuela, to a lesser extent, are all emerging. The strength of the Brazil, Russia, India, China, the BRICS, the realignment of that of the relationship in trade, I think, is going to have a significant impact, which we've sort of set aside in 23, but we can't continue to ignore in 2024. The United States cannot continue to be the only country in the world that increases dramatically the amount of oil and natural gas that it produces and exports. Yes, there are others, but we're quickly coming to a realization, I think, in 2024, where the idea that prices will remain stable or they may actually drop off, which some organizations, Energy Information Agency, Deloitte, and others have been coming out saying, nothing to see, nothing. I think they're whistling past their own graves. I think it's a very dangerous circumstance in which we ignore, the signals that are out there that would lead to a much greater supply constraint and a likelihood of even greater demand. Whatever the outcome should be, I think 2024 will prove not to be a carbon copy of 2023 or something less. I think at the end of 2024, we're going to be seeing some surprises, unfortunately, and very unpleasant ones that are going to lead to much higher prices for Canadians and, for that matter, energy users globally.
Dan, it's been great to have you back in 2024 for our first show of the new year. But when you're not hanging out with us here on SaltWire, talking about all things energy related, where can folks find you?
Well, look, first of all, everything I do here in SaltWire is usually the first thing I have to say this week. So it's important you consult SaltWire first in our work here at Prices at the Pumps, because it's not just about obviously Atlantic Canada, it's about the entire country and the world picture on energy. But if you do need to reach me, gaswizard.ca is where I predict prices, and of course, president@affordableenergy.ca is my email.
Dan, we teased this at the end of last year, but next week, the food professor from Dalhousie University right here in Halifax, Dr. Sylvain Charlevoix, will be joining us for a bit of time next week. Quickly, top of mind, what's the first thing you'd like to chat about with Dr. Charlevoix?
Tell us about federal government carbon taxes and their impact on food. That's, I think, the one that everyone wants to talk about. And of course, the man who knows everything about food certainly has a good understanding of the implications of energy pricing on that very product.
Well, we'll look forward to having Dr. Charlevoix with us for a little bit of time next week. And until next week, Dan, be well, be safe, enjoy the rest of your week, have a wonderful weekend, and we will talk again next Wednesday, Dan.
You as well, Scott. Looking forward to next week.
Thank you.